Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Business Insights Room. Every Thursday, Team Sullivan and I, Maya Matsuoka, lead a discussion looking for insights, developments, and new opportunities for the business in Japan. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region.
So I've mentioned in posts before about in the late 80s, I was working with a lot of consultants in the US, but also with Japanese companies as well. But a lot of the consultants were both Japanese and Americans, and they were all preaching the power of culture and quoting Drucker. Drucker was a big proponent of it. He was an anthropologist, basically, the way he wrote, right?
Absolutely.
So, but sometimes we felt, when I say we, myself and other consultants, like John the Baptist crying in the wind when you were dealing with many American cultures that were trying to change, or American companies, I should say, that were trying to change their company. And there was a desire, but then there was that, what are next quarter's, results?
Yeah.
There was always that pressure that more often than not seemed to win.
Right.
And the Japanese companies I was working with were looking 10 years in advance.
Yep.
And they were privately it gave them the freedom to do that, right? So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing and that there's a company like yours that is showing the way. But I just want you to know, I also know it's a struggle to get some companies on board, right?
It is. It's actually less of a struggle since the pandemic. So it's a tragic reason to have a surge in business because of such a worldwide tragedy. But the fact is that it did seem to wake a lot of organizations up to the fact that if you are operating an unintentional or even a toxic culture, when a black swan event comes along, like a worldwide pandemic, and people start questioning, why am I doing anything that I'm doing in my life? Toxic work cultures is one of the first things that people turn their back on. So, our chief scientist here pointed out that when employers started to break the social contract in about the 1980s, employers in America started to break the social contract that had been implied before then, which is, hey, if you show us loyalty, we'll show you loyalty. So you work for us for 20 years, we'll never put you on a layoff list or anything. We'll just be loyal to you too, through thick and thin. And then that contract was basically ripped up and thrown away by employers in America, in the US. And so since then, people have started to question, why do I put up with things that I really don't like at work? Because this concept of loyalty just it doesn't seem fair, and it doesn't seem or feel right to me anymore. And then when something as dramatic as the pandemic comes along, all of people's assumptions turned upside down, and they have to question all of them. And one of the first things that seems to get questioned is, if I don't like my job to begin with, and I may not even have it anyway next month because who knows what's going to happen to this business, why do I put up with this? And so that was a feeder factor to the Great Resignation, or what is called the Great Resignation. That brought a lot of businesses to consulting outfits like us, where they're asking us and other consultants, hey, do I have a toxic culture? I mean, how would I know that I do? I think I might, because I have 40% turnover this year. But what do I do about that? I mean, can I change it? Is this just part of who we are now? Is it hard-coded? What do I do to make my culture strong and attractive and effective? Oh, and by the way, is this just a new cost that I have to live with now? Or is this actually something that makes my organization better? So these are all questions that have become a lot more common since the pandemic.
Yeah, that's something which we have been observing here in Japan, I'm sure, and then in other parts of the world, not only in the United States, I believe. But so before we continue, Eric, thank you for coming today. And so just let me introduce you to everybody here. So
Please, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Today we've got Eric Fraser with us here talking about corporate culture and how important it is. And Eric is head of products for Culture Partners, a consulting company that specializes in helping organizations improve their culture. So without much or any further delay, Eric, I would like to give you the opportunity to continue talking. But before that, just I think that it is it would be helpful if we give a brief explanation of what culture is for you and, what culture is in a company. And then let's
Sure.
continue from there.
Yeah. So that's one of the most important questions to ask any consultant. If you're in the market for, if you want the consultant's help with your culture, the first thing you should establish is, what do you as a consulting company think of as culture? And you're allowed to have slightly different answers to that, but they all do tend to coalesce around this concept of culture being the established norms in behavior and beliefs and experiences. So what experience would seem normal or feel normal at your company? What belief would be regarded as normal in your company? And what behavior would be regarded as normal in your company? And the accumulation of all of those makes up your culture. So that's when we answer the question, what do we think of as culture? We say it is the established norms in experiences, beliefs, and behaviors in an organization. And that's where we start. The next question we usually get is, okay, so why would I care about that? What benefit do I get out of caring about that? Now, the first answer really is, as an employer, you have a moral responsibility to not make your employees' lives miserable when they're at work. So the first and primary reason you should care about it is because you have a moral responsibility to not be, a cause of misery or stress in your employees' lives. But the second answer following closely behind is, if you are intentional and good at managing culture, you can greatly affect the results that you experience as an organization. So, for example, if you're running, let's say a bullet train service, the speed at which you can clean the train between, turnarounds, that's partly going to depend on the culture that you establish. It won't just be the strength of the written procedures that you use to clean the train. It'll also be the sense of pride that the people cleaning the train have, the belief that they have in their heads about what their role is and how important it is. Those aspects of culture will actually affect how quickly you can clean the train. So that's just a really simple example of how aspects of culture affect, concrete performance of the organization.
Yes, I like it how you put it, that we are all allowed to have slightly different perspectives and understanding of culture, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to core understanding. And then I think there is one more thing, just you said, if you're able to manage culture, and this just stuck with me now. And well, for us who have been, working out of their home countries and also living out of their home countries, it's been also a recurring theme, like management of culture, because as you said, when the culture in an organization is toxic, it is really difficult to get it back on track. And of course, you need to manage it. But how can you do that? I mean, this is a fascinating topic for me, and I cannot imagine, how difficult it is. Or I can imagine, and even because of this, it's a fascinating topic. So
Absolutely.
Some approaches or, of doing that.
Yeah. So no matter which consulting outfit you go to, probably they're going to say the first thing we have to do is make a diagnosis of what the culture is now. So in our case, because we believe it to be the accumulation of experiences, beliefs, and behaviors, that's what we're going to be diagnosing. And the diagnostics that we use, for example, look for certain dimensions in those three things. So, for example, 4 dimensions that we very deliberately measure are the degree of feedback seeking between people, the degree of psychological ownership of their tasks, the degree and nature of creative problem solving, and the degree to which people take effective action when action is needed. So the first step is usually diagnosis, but then the second step in our method, for example, we encourage our clients to start with the experiences that they as an employer are setting up, enabling, and giving their employees. So what we coach them to understand is that the experiences they're creating for their employees are the key input to the belief systems that are forming and being reinforced in the minds of their employees. Those belief systems then drive behaviors, beliefs, and experiences all mixed together as ingredients that affect each other. And the end recipe, that is your culture. So you are like the chef. You can actually choose how to mix those ingredients. You don't have to just trust it all to fate. usually the biggest lever and the most exposed lever you can pull is the experiences that you as an employer are giving your employees. So an example of this would be, let's say that you identify that there is a lack of trust between your salespeople and the engineers that make the product. So the engineers might think, those sales guys, they always just promise the world and they don't even understand what the product does. And, they get us into these bad deals where we have to make custom machines because they didn't understand what they were selling. Meanwhile, the sales people might be saying, those engineers, they don't really understand what the customer wants. They're just off there in their, they're in their little labs and their production facilities and they're just making things the way they think it should be made. But then I know what the actual customer wants and they never listen to me and they never build the machines the way that I tell them they should be built. So that's partly just a mechanical communication issue, but it turns into a culture issue really, really fast, because what happens is that people's beliefs form, they're reinforced, and then they're solidified. And then no matter how much you change a procedure or a policy, what you find is that the salespeople get set in this mindset that the engineers are out of touch with the market, and then the engineers get set in this mindset that the salespeople don't understand the machines. So the experiences that they are having are usually reinforcing those beliefs. And so what you have to do is understand what experiences are reinforcing the belief and what experience would unwind that belief. So it won't happen in a week, and it may not happen in a quarter, and it might take several months to unwind this, but you've got to start being very deliberate about what specific experiences are reinforcing each of these beliefs. What experience do the engineers have every day that reinforce the belief that the salespeople don't understand the machine? And what experience are the salespeople having every day that reinforce the belief that the engineers are out of touch with the market? And once you start to look at that really deliberately and honestly, you can start to unwind the experiences you don't want to be happening and replace them with experiences that you do want to be happening.
Yes.
And it might be as simple as, hey, let's take 2 engineers to a client facility and let's walk the floor of the plant where the machines are made, and let's make the engineers just watch how the machines are used. And then after that, let's just go to lunch or dinner with the engineers and talk about what we saw. That might be an experience that helps unwind a negative belief.
Yeah, Eric, is it okay, Maya? Did you?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, Eric, that resonated because I used to be in sales a long time ago, early 90s, and I worked for an American manufacturing company, and we were developing the Japanese market. And I experienced exactly what you described firsthand, because there was this big gap between the salespeople and the engineers. But we needed the engineers because we made custom injected molded parts, right? And so we really needed them, right? And you would have, and part of it was the 2 different cultures. There's a lot of hyperbole with salespeople, and they want to make the customer happy, so they make promises, and they don't always understand the technical aspects. And then there's the engineers who have no interface with the customer, and you would bring in a quote, and they'd look at the drawing and say, and they would just be trashing the customer. And
Right.
and my my response to that was I started bringing the engineers with me to the customer to have these meetings on what the critical dimensions were, so they would interface with the customers. And
There you go.
as soon as they got face to face with the customer, both sides were instantly humanized, and they turned into pussycats. These engineers.
Right.
All it took was walking in the other person's shoes, right?
Right.
And kind of to that point, you talked about cleaning the trains quickly and it being part of culture. That parallels exactly with a factory and changing a mold or a die. And the
Right.
justification above culture is utilization of your equipment. If it's down, it's not making parts, so you're losing money, right? I mean, that's the mindset. But it's still, as you said, it's teamwork. Like a pit crew changing tires in 20 seconds. That's how they approach it, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I had to laugh at that. That difference. So. Anyway, just some things that jumped out at me listening to you. But yeah, you're absolutely. Oh yeah, there's one more point I want to make. Southwest Airlines, I don't know how they're doing now, but once upon a time, they had the quickest turnaround of airplanes, and they had fairly flexible job descriptions where people could pitch in and help each other, and that was part of that culture. And what happened was, and this is way, way back, maybe 15 years ago or more, there was a problem between the pilots and the baggage handlers at Southwest. And the way Southwest dealt with it was they made the pilots do the baggage handler's job for a week.
Yeah.
To create empathy. And, fortunately, the baggage handlers didn't fly the planes for a week for everyone's safety. Right? So I think that, and again, I don't know how their culture is doing now, but the point is being that even there are American companies that have created these cultures. I guess.
Right, exactly. And that strategy of creating empathy by either direct observation of someone else's job or making them do part of someone else's job for a while, that's a pretty popular method for creating empathy and understanding across different teams or different parts of an organization. And that's just one example of creating a different experience, an experience that unwinds something you don't want believed anymore. Like, oh, they're so lazy. They could do it so much quicker if they just tried and worked harder, right? That might be a belief that you want to just expel from your organization. And then it can create beliefs that you want. Like, if the engineers observe you talking intelligently about the machines to the customer, they might go back and say, you know what? That guy actually does understand our machines pretty well. I heard him describe how the machines work to the customer, and they're not ignorant. These people actually get it. So that might be a type of experience that unwinds a negative thing and creates a positive thing in its place. So, that's one aspect of culture change. There are many others. A lot of them are to do with, at its heart, is really the attitude of understanding that when you're part of an organization, you must function to some extent as a team. So the ultimate, I guess, example of team function in nature might be something like a hive of bees. So there's literally a hive mind. Now, it's probably not realistic for most organizations to function like a hive of bees, but usually what you find is that there are so many degrees of difference and non-coordination between parts of a company that if you push them to be more coordinated, something good happens. So there's lots of methods for doing that as well, like creating cross-functional teams for problem solving, creating methods for information exchange and feedback that follow a particular structure, like a pilot's checklist. So when you meet someone from a different department to discuss a common problem that's touching both of your departments, that you actually use a structured checklist for that conversation rather than, oh yeah, okay, what do you want to talk about? Oh, I don't know, what do you want to talk about? So actually adding structure into some of these things can actually help nudge and push your culture in a positive direction.
Yes, all these steps or methods of creating that beehive mentality, let's say, they sound great, but I have noticed one thing, especially during the pandemic here, in the organization that I worked for, there was that tendency of, let's say, sharing information. The team members shared information mostly by email.
Yeah.
And then that's, in the beginning, of course, everybody was like, yeah, we have no other way to do that because we had to stay at home, 3 or 4 times a week. And then we worked on shifts. So some people were not in the office, others were there. So we couldn't meet in person and actually exchange that information in person. But then as the pandemic progressed, and not suddenly, but gradually, that, became the norm, and people stopped talking directly to one another. So, and of course, that was also something which I thought was really not good, not conductive to, improving the communication between people. Because to me, it looks like communication is very important when you actually try to create a good corporate culture or to create that beehive mentality at the workplace.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, communication is absolutely critical. Let me ask you, Maya, did you notice that when people shifted from in-person or synchronous voice-to-voice communication and then back to email, which is asynchronous and written, were there certain elements of the communication that got lost?
Yes.
Like, for example, maybe when they were face-to-face, there was an exchange of just social, bonding before you got into the business of whatever it was you wanted to talk about. What we see sometimes is when you revert back to an asynchronous written mode of communication and you abandon the face-to-face or the synchronous voice-to-voice, there are certain elements of the interaction that just get dropped. And you find out, oh, that element was actually important. It was actually doing something.
Yes, there was that. To me personally, how I felt it was like when I was in the office, I could even subconsciously, pick up so much more information than when I was at home, and that was because I could hear other people talking, and discuss their projects, the projects that they worked on. And so,
Right.
even though I was not directly involved in those projects, just overhearing their conversations gave me so much more information about each one of them was doing.
Right.
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 And that's something that we cannot get via email. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was a lot of information lost, actually. And when I felt that when I lost that information, I actually, lost so much more than just the information, but also, even if you wish, the empathy to my
Yeah.
colleagues there, because
Yeah.
suddenly it's like, well, I don't know what they're doing. They are probably, just sitting in front of the computer at home, and
hmm
doing nothing else or something like that.
That's very common, Maya. So as a lot of the workforce has shifted to remote work, as a lot of the communication has shifted from in-person to email or Slack or some other written asynchronous form, two things have disappeared from a lot of interactions. Number one is what I'll just call humanizing social interactions, where instead of just going straight to the point of what you're discussing, there's some kind of exchange that reminds the other person, hey, I'm a person like you and you're a person like me. And while it was not planned that, hey, let's talk about the weather, it wasn't a method to make sure that you humanized each other. It was happening because that's what people do when they're face to face. So the second thing that gets dropped a lot of the time is informal, unplanned information flow. So that's what you were talking about when you were in the office. You didn't go there to listen in on other people's conversations explicitly, but because you were there, you just did hear some useful things.
Yeah.
And so that's an informal, unplanned pickup of information. So what we do as consultants, we identify things like that are necessary but are no longer there, and we find ways to add them back in. So here's a really simple example of what we do at our own company. We are a 100% remote company, almost 100% remote now. And so we realized that affects this humanizing element of communication. We don't see each other in person very much at all. So when we get on Zoom, every meeting, the first thing we do is we exchange what we call a statement of gratitude. And it can be something as simple as, I'm really grateful for, the coffee maker in my house that makes perfect coffee every time, or it might be I'm grateful for the fact that it's beautiful weather outside. But this is just a small and easy ritual that we have that has the effect of reminding everyone that, hey, I'm a person. I may not be in the same room as you, but remember, I'm still here. I'm a person. I'm more than just this functioning thing that gives you stuff you want to get at work. And it's not exactly the same as being in a room with someone, but it is addressing an element, a necessary element of human interaction that may be skipped if you don't deliberately put it back in there when you go from in-person to virtual communication. So the same approach can be taken when you realize that, okay, everyone's using email now. You can start to create structures and protocols and little rituals where if you are going to discuss a problem over email, make sure that you structure the email in the following way. And you can create structures, and there are lots of different structures for problem definition, for example. You can create them in a way that makes sure that the person on the other side doesn't feel like, oh, you don't care about me, you're trying to put the blame on me, or you're trying to deflect any risk that you will be blamed, or you just don't understand how much work I have and you're just asking me to do more work. So all of those types of problems can be addressed simply by intelligent protocols and little rituals.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that there are such protocols and that the human element can be put back into the communication, because without that, it's really easy to feel, how can I put it, singled out, and then, not only just that, but also left behind.
Right. Yeah, that's really common for remote workers who had to transition very suddenly from in-person to remote. A lot of people report that I don't feel included anymore. I don't feel like I'm part of the whole. And I also don't feel like I'm understood. So there's this feeling that they have been sort of expelled from a group. Not that, they were given a notice that, hey, you're no longer part of this, but just not being in the office or, working remotely when some people aren't, they can feel like they have not been included anymore, or that their contributions are not being recognized. So again, there are processes, structures, and rituals that you can use to address exactly those problems.
Yeah, that's
So
fascinating.
so you can create more of a feeling of inclusion for people who are remote if you are deliberate about the structures and the rituals that you observe in your organization when you interact with those people.
Right. And then who should be the leading person in that? Because, of course, we all know that leaders or managers, of course, we also know that a leader and a manager are often not the same person in one organization.
Right.
But who should take the lead in creating that, let's say, culture of inclusion?
Right. So I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch for what we do, but I do want to give you a concrete answer of something that is actually done. So I can't speak for other consultants and the way they do it, but here's how we do that. So in a large company of, let's say, 10,000 people, say, help us do this. Now, how many people should be involved? Should we just, make it the job of the head of HR worldwide? What do we do practically? So here's how we would do it. We advise them to create a committee, a culture steering committee that has representation from all of the groups that you want to experience this culture change. You have one person on that steering committee as the head of the culture project, if you like, the engagement to change the culture. And that person has to report or have visibility and authority given by the CEO of the company. So it cannot just stop at the head of HR. It can't be an HR initiative. Mm-hmm. It's got to be something that the CEO publicly acknowledges and says, I am appointing this person to be the head of this effort. And this committee is going to help this person. Now, the actual work of changing behaviors and beliefs and experiences happens in many, many different areas. So it's not just things that the committee does. It's not just things that the leader does, but it's a series of events, workshops, meetings, changes to systems that are facilitated by the committee, but are sometimes done by other people. So I hope that's a concrete answer to who does this. It's one person leading, it's a committee supporting them, and the committee and the person leading is given direct authority by the CEO, who has to publicly come out and say, this is important to me. I'm giving these people this accountability and this authority to do it, because if we achieve this change, this good thing will happen to us.
Yeah.
And that's got to be stated really clearly too. It's like, why are we doing this?
Yes, the why question.
Yeah.
Setting the goal, yes, is important. To me, actually, I have, like when we have a goal, obviously the organization as a whole can aim to achieve it. And then just stepping back a little bit, I should say that from my observations here in Japan, and I have worked for 20 years, I have worked for several companies in this country, but I have noticed that the most difficult part is actually acknowledging the fact that the culture has gone bad.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty difficult mind shift to make, because it's the leaders have to admit that something went wrong. What we notice is a lot of the time we're brought in just after a change of senior leadership, because it's easier for the new person to say, well, I wasn't here when this went bad, but it's gone bad. But of course, it's not my fault, because it was the other person that was just, I'm replacing. So I'm the good guy. I'm riding in on a white horse and I'm going to fix this. So it's easier for the new leader to call us and say, hey, please help me come and fix my culture. Because they have the luxury or the ability to say, well, this happened before I got here, but I'm now allowed to say it's gone bad.
Right.
I would just say, though, it's too bad that preoccupation with being blamed as a driving motivation.
Yeah. It's scary to accept blame, even in little quantities. It's frightening, and that's encoded into all of our psyches. Even very young children behave this way. And in one of our workshops, we actually show a video of a young child deflecting blame for something that she was very clearly responsible for, but she was basically trying to say it wasn't me. And we point out, this is human. This is just human nature to do this. So let's not deny that. Let's not pretend that we can change human nature. Let's just work around this reality. And there is a way to teach people to be more honest and more responsible and more accountable for things that have gone wrong under their watch. So we teach that it doesn't have to be dangerous and the death of your career to put your hand up and say, okay, you know what? That went wrong under my watch. I understand it. I see it, and I will now do something about it.
Yeah, I guess that's the most scary part for let's say, quite a few people. I would say not just manager, but as you said, for everybody, even, because we are human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is what we call, the burning platform, which is that even though you may not be a new CEO, things may have gone so bad that you are ready to try anything, and you've tried a whole bunch of other things, and you have enough people around you saying, this is the culture. Part of it is the culture. Part of it is that we don't trust each other anymore. Part of it is that everyone in the worker levels thinks that everyone in management is an idiot, or whatever it is. These are culture issues that are being described, and sometimes the platform is burning so hot that the CEO will say, you know what, okay, I get it. Let's work on this. Let's work on the culture.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. At one level, and again, I worked in manufacturing with the Japanese, so that's my bubble, right? And
Yeah.
I'll be the first to admit Japanese corporate culture has lots of weaknesses, and even more so in the white collar world. But one thing they were really good at was doing what Deming said, is drive fear out of the factory, out of the organization, right?
Yeah.
It existed in the white collar areas, but in the factory, they never blamed operators. I mean, never.
Right.
And the operators were all afraid of being blamed. And I remember a Japanese manager going out with me and saying, tell her it's my fault because I didn't, kind of to echo your words, I didn't provide the conditions where she will succeed. So,
Yeah.
and he actually apologized to her. But it was still very difficult to overcome that fear. But the attempt was made through that. So the blame rolls uphill attitude, at least within the factory world.
Right. So the popular label for that right now in the culture consulting world is creating psychological safety. And that manager was demonstrating, he was creating psychological safety by going out and saying, I'm sorry, this was my fault. I did not create the right conditions for you. So when people hear him saying that to an operator, the other operators are saying, so I can now admit that something's gone wrong at my station, and I won't necessarily be fired or blamed for it.
Yeah, not
So,
only that, that's the foundation of Kaizen. You have to acknowledge your weaknesses to get better. And so they had to,
right.
They didn't want the operators hiding their mistakes. They wanted to admit it. And then you praise people for admitting it. And then you establish your baseline, and then you praise people for improving. I mean,
Right.
that was the culture. And the thing is, you have to, you know this, you have to keep repeating that message over and over again and demonstrating.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, one slip up will create a very negative reversal of that belief. So if what you're trying to do is create this very positive belief that you're allowed, in fact, you're encouraged to be honest about what's going wrong. If one manager comes in and starts blaming people, saying, okay, that's totally unacceptable, and you're an idiot for letting that happen, that that reverses the belief, and it takes a long time to build it back up again because it destroys trust. But this is really, simple and common concept that without psychological safety, you will never actually truly know what's going wrong because no one will tell you.
And American style 3 write-ups and you're out system, which many factories in the U.S. employ, I had to work against that because it was. I understand it was to protect the company, but my assumption, I went into it saying people want to do a good job, and if they don't, I'm the boss. It's my responsibility to make sure they do. I mean, that was always my attitude, but I often battled HR for that reason. And it was unfair. It was a 2-tiered system because white collar people made mistakes all the time and nobody wrote them up. So you had 2 standards, right? And the big argument was they have to take responsibility. And in their mind, responsibility equals punishment. And in my mind, responsibility was inviting them to be on the improvement team and help us make it never happen again. And then praise them and get them invested in it, which it's a really powerful way to deal with it based on my experience. And I learned it from the Japanese.
I think it is a powerful way to do it. And that is another really common and becoming more popular concept, which is that accountability or responsibility should not feel like a burden. It should feel like an enablement. It should feel like when you are given accountability for something, you have more agency, you have more control, and you have more say over the outcome of your own experience, both short-term and long-term. Whereas how it's a lot of the time implemented in a very short-term way is, this is a burden on you. This is something you have to carry now. This is another way that we're going to judge you. So there is a wrong way and a right way to give accountability throughout your organization. And that's another really important aspect of culture consulting right now is how are you expressing accountability and how are you giving accountability for people?
Yes, that's another great point to talk about, I believe. But before we continue, so Yuka, if you have comments or questions, please.
Well, yeah, thank you. I thought I would never get to ask.
Good morning. I'm so sorry, Yuka. We're looking forward to hearing your question.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway, like actually, sort of it's a personal thing, but it's 91 degrees out there, and then our AC, like blew up. So I'm sorry. So maybe I'm a little bit suffering from this, heat wave. Anyway, hi Eric, thank you. And then so I went to your website, and it's very professionally done. And then I noticed that there's all your client list. They're all who and who's in U.S. Like Johnson and Johnson, and it's not even S&P 500. It's like S&P 100. So I was just thinking, is this it's great that we all have to work on the corporate culture, but as a client, the company has to have the like a managerial on the human resources to work on culture.
Yes. Yeah. So you're pointing out something there that we have actually not gotten right yet, which is our ability to deliver help to clients who are not big organizations. We've worked out the economic formula for how to sell our help to big organizations with lots of money. And the way that we justify that is we say, well, that's how we help the most people. Because, Johnson & Johnson has thousands of people, whereas, the local coffee shop here in Portland has 5 people. So who would we rather help? Well, let's help Johnson & Johnson, because then we're literally helping thousands of people at once. But what we also understand at a moral level is that our purpose as a company is not just to help big, rich companies. It's to help as many people as we can. And a lot of those people in America work for small and medium-sized businesses. They're actually the largest employer segment in America. So what we have to get right, which we have not gotten right yet, and this is part of my job as head of product, is to design solutions that can be delivered inexpensively to companies who don't have, $1 million to spend fixing culture. They have $5,000 in a training budget, and they'd like to train 3 managers of a coffee shop on how to talk to the employees in a more motivational way. So we need to find the economic formula for how to deliver what we know to those people for a price that they can afford without losing money ourselves.
Actually, it's great that you touched on that, though, because I was wondering, because on the abstract level that, I understood that it's corporate culture is critical, but then how you sort of, because everybody's so busy on the daily responsibilities, right? And it's
Yes.
great that they have to, feel accountability, but what exactly you sort of squeeze in to let them know that, you just said how the managers talk to their employees so that they could motivate, their subordinates. So exactly, do you have a framework to sort of you do have a framework? Okay.
We do, but here's where we need to get better is, now let's say we go to a company like Johnson & Johnson and we say, look, we need you to identify anyone that manages 50 people or more, and we want to put them through a 1-day workshop. And then 30 days after that 1-day workshop, they're going to have a check-in call with one of our consultants, and that'll be about 45 minutes. And then every 3 months after that, they're going to go to a little mini workshop inside of Johnson & Johnson where they're going to exchange information about this and that and just basically do a check-in. Right. So that might be easier for a large company like Johnson & Johnson than it is for, let's say, a small manufacturing company where they don't have any wiggle room in people's schedules. So if you say, oh, I want to take that supervisor off the line for a day, that's kind of a disaster because there is no one to back that guy up. And now you've slowed down the production line for a day because that person isn't there. So we need to find ways to deliver what we know, to deliver the help and the knowledge in ways that do not involve, hey, come to a workshop for an entire day, leave your job for an entire day and come to this workshop. So we know how to do it when people can afford to work, to leave their job and come to a workshop for 1 day or 2 days. But what we've got to find is a way to deliver it through things like micro-learning, where, no, don't come to a workshop for a day, watch this 5-minute video, on Monday, think about it, practice it next time you talk to one of your subordinates. Then on Tuesday, we're going to send you a text message and you're just going to answer a question, yes or no. So that's, a sort of a modern style of micro-learning and reinforcement that we have to learn to use to deliver our type of help. And the honest truth is we haven't found the formula of how to do that effectively yet. We're very good at doing it if we can pull people into 1 day and 2 day workshops.
But that sounds great though, because I was wondering, how would you exactly do that? It's great on paper. I mean, how do you practice with human being with emotions?
Yeah.
So like that's kind of interesting. No, it's just like a follow up with text and stuff. And I was actually looking forward to hearing about those like a concrete plans and then ideas. Thank you. And I have two more questions. And Maya, don't worry, I'm going to be very quick. So I didn't see any Japanese company's name on your website. And then I tried to remember, this is your second time in this room, right?
Might be the third.
Oh, my third.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize.
But, no, that's all right.
So what?
Not at all.
So the previous two occasions, were you talking to us about entry to Japan, or could you remind me?
There was, the last time I was here, I was talking about basically if you were running a business that was consulting on culture, how would you enter the Japanese market? But to answer your first question directly, we don't have any major Japanese clients. We recently signed up a US subsidiary of a relatively large Japanese company, and I'm not sure whether I'm even allowed to tell you who they are, but you would probably know who they were. A lot of our clients actually don't want us talking about the fact that we're helping them fix culture. So until I know exactly what I'm allowed to say, I won't tell you their name. But this is the US subsidiary. Now they seem to have an interest in taking some of these concepts to Japan because they're asking us about Japanese translations of our materials and Japanese subtitling on the videos that we have and all of these things. But we have not successfully established a footprint in Japan.
Interesting.
I don't think I think that's a good first step, though.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think that if other Japanese companies saw that we were successful with a Japanese company whose first experience was through their US subsidiary, I think that might make a difference. I know that it's important for Japanese executives to see that other Japanese executives have done something and it worked. I know that they're a little averse to being the first person to try something. And actually, that's kind of a natural human aversion, not just a Japanese aspect. But we're hoping that that might be what happens. We're very confident that we'll help the US subsidiary. We're very confident of that. How that transfers to Japan, we're not going to be very pushy about saying, hey, look at how helpful we were. Why don't you introduce us to the Japanese executives? We're not going to push that at all. We're going to let them pull us to Japan on their timetable.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So,
well,
yeah.
I don't know. I think that pushing may be what they need. But anyway, I may be wrong about that. But anyway, the last question. You talked about this, like a bullet train. The turnaround. I have seen this. The lady in pink uniform at Tokyo Station, and then bullet station pulling to the Tokyo Station, and then turn around going back to Nagoya. The turnaround time is very impressive. What they do, it's just like so I thought it's probably no JR culture. It's probably like a national culture. So my question, I can be wrong. My question is like so because it seems like you deal with a lot of globally large entities. So do you have to take into account some sort of that each country have different cultural requirements? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, because in large organizations, I mean, basically once you get over about 300 people, you're going to have subcultures within those 300 people. Even if they're all working in the same building, you'll get subcultures. So definitely when you're dealing with global organizations and you go to Italy and then you go to Spain and then you go to the US, you absolutely have subcultures. What you do find, though, is that even across those national subcultures, the CEO is usually trying to establish that there is a company culture that he or she wants recognized. So I'll take, this is a client that I'm actually not allowed to name, but they are a large global brand that makes physical objects. And the CEO came to us when her company was in a crisis point. So this was the burning platform situation. She was also relatively new. So I guess she had the ability to say, well, this platform caught fire before I got here, but I'm a firefighter. I'm here to put it out. So her company does operate in almost every country in the world. And she wanted certain cultural beliefs established regardless of where you worked. One of them was a value for innovation. So she observed that the company had lost its confidence for innovation and that they had a belief about themselves that they were just a stodgy old company and that they would never really change the important things. So she wanted to destroy that belief and replace it with a belief that, no, actually, we're going to go innovation first. We're going to be the first to market with the weirdest ideas and the most challenging things. And her idea was it doesn't matter whether you work in the US, whether you work in China, whether you work in Brazil, or India, I want you to believe this about yourself, that you work for a company that values innovation and that you are empowered to innovate. So even respecting the national cultures, most CEOs do want certain key beliefs to be respected and held as prime, regardless of which country you work in.
And then you believe that's the correct approach?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because we don't see a conflict between these key cultural beliefs. And we usually advise people, no, not usually, we advise people to pick 3. So when you pick 3 cultural beliefs for your company, we're yet to find a situation where we say, oh, you know what, this isn't going to work because this will never work in China. This will only work in the US, Brazil, England, Germany, but it won't work in China. Usually the company is smart enough to pick 3 beliefs that will work in every country that they exist in.
And that's sometimes not an easy thing to do. But
no, it's not easy to settle on 3 cultural beliefs. That is a big debate.
Yeah, indeed.
Usually people say, oh, we can't limit ourselves to 3. We actually have 10, we have 13, we have 15, we have 21, and we always say, pick 3.
Right.
So it's very challenging. We get a lot of pushback on it.
Sorry. So why do companies, don't want you to disclose their names? They think that they have something to fix, which is an embarrassing thing. What?
Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just, many companies just have a long-standing policy that when they work with consultants, they don't let the consultants talk about what they're doing, and that they're not to be mentioned.
That's exactly my experience. They want to. Some of the companies I dealt with, they want to have strict control over their image, and they don't want me or anybody else mentioning their name.
Yeah. Even when you're an extremely well-respected brand name consulting company like McKinsey, I happen to know that there is an enormous, famous technology company that uses McKinsey all the time. And you would think that it's pretty safe as a CEO to say, yeah, I buy consulting from McKinsey. I mean, they're a very premium brand name consulting company. No one thinks that you're dumb if you're working with McKinsey, right? They probably just think that you're very rich as a company. But this company just refuses to let McKinsey mention them. So sometimes it's just a long-standing policy. We don't let consultants mention us.
Right. Well, that's another fascinating side of the corporate world.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and then, so we have gone for almost 1 hour, and please, everybody who is in the audience, if you have comments or questions to Eric, or, just observations you want to share, let us know. Raise your hand so that we can bring you up on stage. We don't have that much time left, but of course, if you are willing to... Oh, you did, Stephen? Okay, sorry. Then here we go. Please come up. Good morning, Stephen.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the conversation. Yes, I have a question for Eric. So just a little bit of background. So I was very fortunate. I worked with companies that had amazing culture, but I also had an experience working for a Japanese company based in Tokyo. I was in Hawaii, and they had a terrible culture. This is what they call like a black company. Horrible experience. Anyway.
Yeah.
And but now, so I run 2 companies myself in Japan and 1 in Hawaii. And culturally, I want to keep the same company culture, whether it's Hawaii or Japan, for my company. But I found it very difficult in Japan to try to share my vision and company culture that I want to have with the Japanese local staff, because it feels like it's almost like unnatural for them to, like the concept of transparency, for example, or the concept of taking ownership as managers in terms of whatever your staff is doing, mistake or anything that I don't want to see any finger pointing, like you're the manager, you're in charge of the training, you're in charge of their performance, and we work as a team. Nobody is better than anybody. We're all co-workers, although we have different tasks, different mission, but we're here to support each other, right?
Right.
And so, and the thing is, I try to inspire my company culture to the staff, but since it's not really understood, sometimes I tend to, oh my God, should I enforce it? But enforcing the company culture is against my company culture.
Yeah.
Yes,
I do.
So how do you go with that? Like because I believe, when it comes to different culture, not company culture, but culture, like America, Japan, people are raised differently, different values. And I understand that some people may feel very uncomfortable. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
No, I love this question. I love this question, actually. Thank you. So here's how I think most culture consultants would answer your question. So firstly, your reference to transparency. What it makes me think is the difference in attitude that Japanese subordinates might have when talking to their boss. So in Hawaii, it might be very acceptable for a subordinate to be very quote unquote transparent with their boss and say, hey boss, did you know that most of our workers are afraid to talk to you? And that makes them sort of lie to you a little bit because they're kind of, they don't want to be the person that gets caught in a conversation with you because they feel like it'll eventually turn around to you scaring them about something. Now, that would be culturally weird for a Japanese employee to tell their boss. So a culture consultant would look at it this way. They'd say, right, if what you want is a certain behavior where people are not as conscious about title and hierarchy and they're more conscious about truthful information sharing, then find a cultural belief statement that emphasizes truthfulness and honesty, because in Japan that is respected. Honesty is respected. And then in terms of how you enforce it, so instead of calling it transparency, which might feel a little weird to the Japanese, call it honesty, and then demonstrate what honesty looks like. And when you see it being done, reward it. So instead of enforcing it, saying, you weren't honest, you get a punishment point. Wait until you see a Japanese subordinate finding a way to tell their boss, hey, boss, I feel obligated to tell you something. As your employee, I feel like this is my obligation to share this information. And then, people are smart enough to find within their own national culture a way to observe the stated company cultural belief. So when you see that happen, you reward it and you say, hey, well done, that was great. And instead of giving out punishment points, you give out some kind of reward points. And it can be as simple as, a recognition card, either physical or virtual, that is published for the company to see. This person did this, and that is in support of our cultural belief of honesty to all people at all times. Yeah. And so we would encourage people, don't try to enforce the culture by punishing it when it's not done. Encourage it to grow positively. When someone demonstrates this cultural belief, which has to be worded really carefully, reward it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eric, I would just to add a little nuance. The Japanese like truth, but sometimes it's in a tug of war with harmony. And so sometimes stating the truth openly in front of a group of people could, make someone lose face. Often, I'm not saying this is good or bad, but often the way to deal with it is private feedback, often over alcoholic drinks.
Yes, yep.
And even when Inamori took over JAL to turn JAL around, he struggled because he was talking about Japanese culture and the superior subordinate relationship, and he was known to stay at work late and have beer, and he would invite somebody over, a manager, and he would pour a beer for him and they would drink together. And he said, because that's the only way I can get to his honnet, his true feelings, right? I'm not condoning that behavior, but I'm saying, I guess there are ways around it in Japanese culture, but there always is that dynamic of sometimes the truth is, at least publicly, swept under the rug so harmony can be maintained. So that would be the tightrope that Japan would have to walk, in my view.
Yes, I agree, and I've seen versions of that tightrope outside of Japan, just within certain companies where there is such a value for not being mean or not being hurtful to other people. So very similar to the Japanese concept of harmony first, and it does push against the need to honestly share information about what's really going wrong. So yes, that tightrope does exist. That tension does exist. There is no easy formula that says, "Oh, just do it this way." But the common elements that probably every consultant is going to tell you to do is word the value statement or the belief statement in a way that is not challenging to any of the national cultures that you're operating in. Try to find a belief that will be accepted by all of those national cultures, and then reward the behavior that you see that supports the belief. Now, I know that the example you just described, Tim, it makes it hard to say, oh, hey, I had a beer with, Tim-san, and when he was drunk enough, he told me the truth about what was going on at his plant. I mean, that's really hard. But you might find a way to say, Tim-san communicated an essential truth about an improvement we had to make. And because he communicated it, we were able to make it more quickly. And we just saved ourselves, X $100,000, dollars a week because of this one improvement. And so here is Tim-san's recognition, and we thank him for this, and this supports our cultural belief of and whatever it is, it might be honesty about problems or something like that.
Eric, so I like the idea of rewarding the behavior that we expect from the staff when it's aligned with the culture. But deep inside, I kind of want the staff, to really embrace and understand that culture, not to do it because they know they're going to get rewarded, if that makes sense. So that's where I think the challenge is really high. Is that it's hard to actually inspire and make people understand that belief.
It's like you scripted these questions for me. It really is. So now what we get to is the importance of an inspirational purpose. Because you're right, if it's only attached to transactional rewards, what you lack is sustained emotional connection. So this is also a really important ingredient of a healthy culture, which is a purpose beyond economics, beyond financial reward. So we encourage companies to be really clear on what is your purpose other than being profitable. If you're a for-profit entity, we just assume that if you're in the for-profit world, you have to make a profit. So beyond that, what's your purpose? So an example that I prepared, and I swear I did not script these questions for myself, but an example I prepared is there is a company, a real company that's not a client of ours. It's a friend of mine runs it, and they are using cellular replication to make meat, essentially. So in other words, you can get meat without killing an animal. So it is actually cellular, on the same level, it is cellular meat, but they just didn't have to kill an animal for it. Now, what is the purpose of that company? Is it to sell as much of that product as possible? We encourage people to go deeper than that. We encourage them to find a purpose statement that sounds more like, our purpose is to make sure that no animals suffer in any type of factory farm. See, that's the sort of purpose that's much deeper than economics and that sustains the kind of emotional ownership of the culture that you typically will want from your people. So now it's not just about, well, if I do that certain thing that the CEO likes, I get a gift card, for $100 or something. That's part of it is reminding people, remember, that's the behavior we want. When we see that behavior, we do reward it, we do recognize it. But deeper than that and longer than that, it's that you chose to work for a company whose purpose is to make sure that no animal suffers in a factory farm ever. That's their purpose. And if you sign on to that at an emotional level, you start to own and buy into the cultural beliefs of the company without having to be, rewarded with a $50 gift card to Starbucks every time you do something good.
Thank you for that example, Eric. Yeah, it really explains well what you mean by and of course, sorry, I'm starting to stutter. Inspirational purpose, and so
Not at all.
It is to have a sustained emotional ownership of the culture too. And
right.
Again, it is not easy to maintain in any organization because an organization is a living thing. And of course, there are a lot of people there, people with different personalities. Sometimes some of those personalities are, let's say, more adaptable to the organization. Sometimes they are not. But yeah, there is really the need of sustained effort to keep everybody on track and everybody included in those efforts. So,
yes, it's true.
So thank you very much, Eric. And we are already 10 minutes past 9 o'clock. We usually close the room at 9 o'clock. And so we have gone a little bit longer than usual. That's why I believe that we can continue this this conversation in the future, hopefully the near future, because obviously there is a lot to talk about and a lot to learn from you as well. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure as always. And thank you, everyone, for your questions and your engagement.
Thank you so much, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
The same to you, Eric. And many thanks to everybody who joined us. Next week, we'll be here again on Wednesday, 8 o'clock a.m. Japan times. So we are looking forward to seeing you here again. And have a great day.
Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next week on Thursday at 8 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you.